Hello everyone, Brynn here with an in-depth guide on Spear. I got every Spear Legend to Diamond last season, and I got to Diamond this season using only Spear Legends, and uploaded it to YouTube, and I have 2 Spear Legends that are above level 25. I will be going over each move on Spear, detailing their strengths and weaknesses. Then I will explain the different situations to use them in, and give some overall tips at the end. Neutral Light has short startup frames, very long active frames, and short recovery frames. It covers a small area with great range and does high damage. Light has medium startup frames, short active frames that have a lot of inactive frames in between, and medium recovery frames. It covers a huge area with great range and does high damage. Downlight has medium startup frames, very short active frames, and very long recovery frames. It covers a decent area with low range, dealing low damage. Neutral Air has long startup frames, medium active frames, and long recovery frames. It covers a large area with decent range and it has decent damage. Cider has long startup frames, very short active frames, and very long recovery frames. It covers a small area with great range and does decent damage. Downer has medium startup frames, very short active frames, and very long recovery frames. It covers a small area with great range and does decent damage. Ground Pound has long startup frames, active frames last until you let go, and very long recovery frames. It covers a great area with decent range and does decent damage. Recovery has long startup frames, very long active frames, and long recovery frames. It covers a great area with decent range and does decent damage. Now that I went over all the Spear moves, let's talk about how to use them effectively in the neutral game, which is the part of the game when neither player has an advantage over the other and are trying to land the first hit onto the enemy. Neutral Light is amazing at contesting almost every horizontal move in the game, with some exceptions like Downlight on bow and Sidelight on guns. So if the enemy wants to take you head on, then give them the Neutral Light poke and you win unless it's guns or bows at long range. The incredible amount of active frames that Neutral Light has makes it amazing for punishing predictable dodges. It has a total of 20 active frames, while a normal dodge has 22 frames, and speed dodge has 14 frames. This means that you will hit the enemy after their dodge as long as you use Neutral Light as their dodge starts up to before the dodge ends. And it's also really good at making it hard for the enemy to come up from the side of the platform, because the long range and high active frames will keep you safe while possibly hitting them. Make sure not to use this move though if you think the enemy will dodge close to you, or after you miss a move while near the enemy, because it has a dead zone in which the enemy can go between you and your attack while being safe. A good visual would be that if the character's hands are overlapping or closer, the Neutral Light won't hit. Sidelight is an incredible move to punish enemies that miss a move far from you, because it has fantastic range plus forward movement. It also has a couple of quick strings, such as Sidelight into Downlight into Side-Air, and Sidelight into Side-Air. The only combo it has is Sidelight into Gravity Cancel Neutral Light. The trick to making it work is hitting the Sidelight close to the enemy. If the Sidelight lands too far away, then the enemy is sent too high up, so it's better to try to go for a jump Side-Air in those cases. Using Sidelight to contest enemies is very risky, because they have one of the longest total frames for a light attack, so it's very easy to punish when it misses because it lasts so long. Plus it moves the user forward, which puts the user into a bad position when the Sidelight misses, so it's often not worth it to use unless it is used as a punish against bad spacing, so it should be used more conservatively. Downlight is a decent anti-air move that's best used as a jump prediction or to punish missed moves, rather than to contest people already in the air. The reason is that the hitboxes comes out across the body, rather than extending upwards, leaving it with very little range. Therefore, it can be out-prioritized from above very easily. However, if the enemy were to jump from below into the downlight, then they would immediately bump into the bottom of the hitboxes and get hit very easily. Another benefit to predicting a jump is that using downlight positions the user to avoid most grounded attacks. So if the enemy doesn't jump, then it's unlikely to be punished, since they'll be on the ground. This makes Downlight one of the best engaged moves when used with a speed dodge cancel. Once you charge forward, the enemy will be scared and jump a lot of times only to be hit by the Downlight. If they dodge, then you likely won't get punished, since you'll be in a very different position than where you started. So it's hard to use the correct punish move. And of course, since Downlight does cover a good area, it's also great for punishing people who misses up close, farther away diagonally upwards, or people who dodge dodge into its range, especially since downlight can combo into side air from white damage all the way to early red damage. If you have trouble with downlight side air at 0 damage, then go for downlight neutral air instead, but don't use downlight into neutral air after 0 damage because it doesn't work after that. Neutral air is a great move for covering spears blind spots, which is directly above and up close, especially the diagonal directions, since it hits in a complete circle around the user, which most other moves don't cover. It also has a good amount of active frames for an air move, so it can catch enemies that dodge forward decently, since weapons that have a shorter range than spear often does that because of spear's ability to hit so far away. That's why it's a good idea to balance the spacing with neutral airs to deal with players who dodges forward a lot. It is also one of the best moves to use with a speed dodge into attack cancel, because you can start from a full jump height with it and it will still last long enough so that when you fall to the ground, it'll hit the enemy. So if the enemy keeps jumping up and down really quickly, then engaging with a speed dodge into neutral air is really good. Side air is a pretty long range move that requires precision because of how thin the hitbox is and how short the active frames are. As such, you only want to use this move as either a punish or a jump read. If the enemy is being a bit jumpy outside your range, throwing this out where they're about to jump is relatively safe and effective because if you miss, you can still move back and forth while in recovery frames. So for example, you start the side air over at the waterfall and after it hits, just hold left and you're a decent distance away from it once you're finished with the recovery frames. And likewise, holding forward will move you a decent distance forward. A common mistake that less experienced players make is trying to force the side air onto the enemy by going forward. This is the deadly mistake because side air only has 3 active frames. That's 1/20th of a second. There's no way moving forward for even a fraction of a second longer than necessary will help you hit the enemy 99% of the time. So don't waste the movement moving into the enemy if the side air misses. It just leads to an easy punish by the enemy. Another common mistake is hitting the enemy up close when you're slightly above them, because the tip of the spear is the only thing that does damage, and it arches downwards and is not a straight line forward like a jab. So enemies that are a bit below and in front of you will not be hit by side air. It's best to use neutral for times like this instead. Therefore, the side air is best for punishing and spacing while using the movement in the recovery frames to avoid a punish from the enemy by moving away from them. Down air is an incredibly versatile move because of how simple, quick, and far ranged it is. Unlike side air, which arches, the down air just jabs directly below you. So whenever you are above the enemy, down air is a good move almost all the time because it's quick for an air move and it has more downward range than gun neutral air has upward range, so it will win against just about any upward hitting move. Very good move against enemies with shorter range that try to dodge under you because they think you go for a far range move. Just jump up, let them dodge, then poke them from above. It's also really good for edge guarding because of its downward range. Ground Pound is similar to the neutral air in that it can cover Spear's biggest weakness, which is when the enemy dodges close enough so that side air and ground attacks can't reach them. It's best to use the Ground Pound as a surprise attack because it has high startup and travels slowly. So if you're above the enemy, don't start holding the Ground Pound and hoping it hits because a good player will dodge and punish it because it's slow. Instead, if you miss a neutral light or a side air near the ground and expect the enemy to dodge forward in an attempt to punish, then jump into Ground Pound quickly because it'll still last after they dodge and it covers a huge area below you. It can also be used pretty well in an edgeguard position because it has decent force and covers the sidewall entirely. Recovery is pretty similar to Ground Pound, but it lets you move left and right so it's a bit more flexible and overall safer to use. You can use it to catch enemies jumping and dodging directly above you, but even if they don't, you can simply steer it towards that direction and it could hit them if they were to jump straight up as well. Speed dodging forward into recovery is also great because it covers much more area than a side air could, but it's riskier because it is an all-in engage and you'll be using an air dodge cooldown, which is about 3 times longer than a ground dodge. So use only as a rare mix-up. And like Ground Pound, don't start the recovery from way below the enemy. Most good players can see that coming. Use it when they're almost out of jumps and are closer to you because it moves at about the same speed as a jump. So if they see it coming, then it's avoidable with a single press of a button. That covers the neutral game. Now I will go over some tips and tricks to maximize your damage output and minimize the damage that you take. Neutral light on Spear has very low startup frames and can make it seemingly instant, so if you miss and are on the ground, then going into neutral light right after could work a lot lot of times if the enemy is still horizontal of you. Although downlight is the only move that has a reliable combo with downlight into side air, sidelight and neutral light also gives you enough advantage frames to follow up with more attacks. This means you can attack a couple of frames before the enemy is out of stun, so if done properly, they can only dodge or jump out of the way. A couple of follow-ups that are uncontestable but dodgeable are neutral light into chase dodge sidelight, or downlight, sidelight into downlight into side air, sidelight into side air. Keep in mind though, that even though the enemy can't contest these with an attack of their own, they do have enough time to dodge them. So when I notice the enemies dodging these, I wait for their dodge and hit them when their dodge ends. The most common one that I face almost every game is when I neutral light, the enemy will dodge forward to avoid the chase dodge follow up. So I just let it happen without following up, then I can use neutral light on them. Now I can do a chase dodge sidelight or downlight because they wasted the dodge. It's also really safe to do since if they dodge any other direction, then you're impossible to be punished because of the zoning power of neutral light. Spear is known to have a lot of trouble knocking out enemies with, because its down air and neutral air has noticeably little knockback force, compared to those of weapons like sword, axe, and hammer, which knocks out at much earlier damages. That's why it's important to be able to look out for good opportunities to ground pound, recovery, side air, or use signatures when the enemy is at red damage to be able to knock out enemies efficiently. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, subscribe, and share the video with your friends. Thank you to Bazillin for being a huge supporter 2 months in a row. I'll see you guys next time.